Marcus Thompson was not your typical airline CEO. While most executives spent their days in boardrooms, poring over spreadsheets and attending high-profile meetings, Marcus preferred to stay connected to the heartbeat of his company, its people. As the head of Skylink Airlines, one of the largest carriers in the industry, he had built a reputation for being hands-on, approachable, and deeply invested in the day-to-day operations of his airline. But lately, something didn't feel right. For weeks, Marcus had been poring over customer feedback surveys that painted a troubling picture. Passengers were complaining about everything from delayed services to unfriendly staff. Some even mentioned feeling ignored or undervalued during their flights. On paper, the numbers looked fine. Profit margins were up and ticket sales remained strong. But Marcus knew better than anyone that success wasn't just about profits. It was about creating an experience passengers would remember fondly. And right now it seemed like Skylink was failing at that. One evening, as Marcus sat in his office staring at the glowing screen of his laptop, an idea began to form in his mind. He thought back to his early days in the aviation industry when he worked as a baggage handler before climbing the corporate ladder. Back then, he had learned firsthand how every role within an airline contributed to the bigger picture. From ground crew to pilots, everyone played a part in ensuring smooth operations and happy customers. But as CEO, Marcus realized he had become somewhat insulated from the realities of everyday life on the front lines. That's when he made a bold decision. He would go undercover. The plan was simple, yet daring. Marcus would book a ticket as a regular passenger using an alias so no one would recognize him. He wouldn't inform his team or alert anyone at Skylink. For once, he would experience what it was truly like to fly with his own airline, not as the boss, but as an ordinary traveler. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work dressed casually in jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. His usual tailored suit and polished shoes were nowhere to be seen. He grabbed a backpack instead of his leather briefcase and headed out the door without telling his executive assistant where he was going. At the airport, he approached the check-in counter with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Booking a coach seat on a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles felt almost surreal. Normally, Marcus traveled in luxury, either in first class or aboard the company's private jet. But tonight, he was determined to see things from a different perspective. As he waited in line, Marcus couldn't help but notice the other passengers around him. There was a young couple traveling with a toddler, looking exhausted but excited for their trip. A businessman tapped away furiously on his laptop, clearly trying to maximize productivity before takeoff. An elderly woman clutched her purse tightly, glancing nervously at the departure board. Each person had their own story, their own reason for flying, and Marcus found himself wondering how Skylink fit into those stories. Were they making travel easier? Or were they adding unnecessary stress? When it was finally his turn at the counter, Marcus handed over his ID and boarding pass. The agent barely glanced at him as she processed his documents, her face set in a neutral expression. "Here you go, sir," she said curtly, handing back his passport and ticket. Marcus thanked her politely, though he couldn't shake the feeling that her tone lacked warmth. Was this standard behavior, or was she simply having a bad day? He tucked the thought away for later reflection. Boarding the plane proved to be another eye-opening experience. Marcus shuffled down the narrow aisle, weaving past passengers who were already settling into their seats. The interior smelled faintly of stale air and recycled coffee. Rows of tightly packed seats stretched ahead of him, each one occupied by someone eager to reach their destination, or perhaps just desperate to escape the confines of the cabin as quickly as possible. Finally, Marcus reached row 27, where his assigned seat awaited. Squeezing past the passenger in the window seat, he slid into the middle chair, which felt surprisingly cramped despite his average build. He adjusted his backpack under the seat in front of him and glanced around. The upholstery was worn with threads fraying at the edges. Overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting an uneven glow across the cabin. It wasn't exactly the glamorous image Skylink promoted in its advertisements. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Marcus took note of the flight attendants bustling about. They moved efficiently, performing pre-flight checks and preparing the galley for service. Yet there was something strained about their demeanor, a sense of fatigue that lingered beneath their practiced smiles. One attendant in particular caught his attention. She appeared to be in her late 40s with dark circles under her eyes and a clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. Her movements were deliberate but hurried, as if she were racing against time. Marcus leaned back in his seat, feeling both intrigued and uneasy. He had always prided himself on fostering a positive workplace culture at Skylink, but now he wondered if that culture extended beyond the glossy brochures and motivational speeches. What challenges did these employees face daily? Did they feel supported by management, or were they struggling silently under mounting pressures? The engines roared to life and the plane surged forward. As the wheels lifted off the tarmac, Marcus braced himself, not just for the turbulence ahead, but for the revelations that might come with it. Little did he know the real journey was only beginning. As the plane climbed higher into the night sky, Marcus settled into his seat, trying to get comfortable. The initial excitement of going undercover was starting to wear off, replaced by a growing awareness of the realities around him. The cramped space, the faint hum of the engines, and the occasional bump of turbulence were all reminders that this wasn't going to be a luxurious flight. For the first time in years, Marcus felt what it was like to be an ordinary passenger, someone who didn't have access to priority boarding, extra legroom, or gourmet meals. He glanced around the cabin, observing the details he might have overlooked in his role as CEO. The seats were older than he remembered, with fabric that looked faded and slightly worn. A few armrests had cracks in them, and one of the tray tables in the row ahead refused to stay locked in place, wobbling every time its owner tried to use it. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was far from the polished image Skylink projected in its marketing campaigns. Marcus made a mental note to investigate how often cabins were inspected and refurbished. The lighting inside the plane was another issue. Instead of the soft ambient glow promised in Skylink's advertisements, the overhead lights flickered intermittently, creating an uneven and somewhat unsettling atmosphere. Some passengers squinted at their books or phones, while others reached for the reading lights above their heads, only to find that half of them weren't working. Marcus sighed quietly. These small inconveniences added up, turning what should have been a smooth journey into something less enjoyable. His attention shifted to the flight attendants, who were now moving through the aisles with practiced efficiency. They handed out safety cards, demonstrated emergency procedures, and answered questions from passengers. At first glance, they seemed competent enough, but Marcus noticed subtle signs of strain. One attendant struggled to balance a heavy cart, filled with snacks and drinks, her movements stiff and deliberate. Another repeatedly asked passengers to lower their window shades, her tone polite but tinged with exhaustion. It was clear that these individuals were doing their best under challenging circumstances, but something about their demeanor suggested they were stretched thin. Marcus couldn't help but compare this experience to the glossy presentations he saw in board meetings. In those discussions, everything always sounded perfect. Staffing levels were optimized, customer satisfaction scores were improving, and operational costs were under control. Yet here in the real world, the cracks were beginning to show. Was this disconnect intentional, or had he simply become too removed from the day-to-day operations? Either way, it troubled him deeply. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the cabin grew quieter. Passengers adjusted their positions, some leaning back to nap while others pulled out books or tablets to pass the time. Marcus decided to do the same, reaching into his backpack for a magazine. But before he could open it, his ears caught fragments of conversation drifting from the nearby galley. Two flight attendants stood close together, speaking in hushed tones. Their voices were low, but the acoustics of the plane carried their words just far enough for Marcus to overhear. "Did you hear about the new schedule changes?" one of them whispered. Her name tag read Sarah. She looked tired, her uniform slightly wrinkled, and her eyes carried a weight that spoke of long hours and little rest. "Yeah," replied the other, whose name tag identified her as Jake. "They're cutting shifts again. I don't know how they expect us to keep up with this workload." Marcus froze, his magazine forgotten in his lap. He leaned back slightly, pretending to focus on the seat back in front of him while straining to catch more of their conversation. This was exactly the kind of insight he'd hoped to gain by flying incognito, the unfiltered truth about life on the front lines of his airline. "It's not just the schedules," Sarah continued, her voice dropping even lower. "They've cut back on supplies too. Last week we ran out of coffee during breakfast service, can you believe that? Passengers were furious and there was nothing we could do about it." Jake nodded grimly. "I heard about that. And did you see the condition of the carts? Half of them are falling apart. We've reported it multiple times, but no one seems to care." Marcus felt a pang of guilt. He prided himself on running a company that valued its employees and customers, yet here were two of his own team members talking about broken equipment and shortages. How had these issues slipped through the cracks? More importantly, why hadn't anyone brought them to his attention? The conversation shifted slightly, veering toward broader frustrations. "It's like management doesn't even understand what we go through," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Every memo talks about improving customer satisfaction, but none of the changes actually make our jobs easier. If anything, they make things worse." Jake chuckled bitterly. "Right? Like those new scripts they want us to follow. Smile more, engage with passengers, blah blah blah. But they don't give us the tools or the time to do any of that. It's all talk." Marcus swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he genuinely cared about making Skylink better, but he knew he couldn't reveal his identity. Not yet. Instead, he sat there silently, absorbing every word, letting the reality sink in. These weren't isolated complaints. They were symptoms of deeper systemic problems. Somewhere along the line, communication between leadership and frontline staff had broken down, leaving employees feeling unheard and unsupported. For the next several minutes, Marcus listened intently as Sarah and Jake discussed specific incidents. A malfunctioning lavatory that hadn't been repaired for weeks, a shortage of blankets during a particularly cold flight, and even a recent incident where a passenger had verbally berated an attendant after waiting too long for a drink. Each story painted a picture of an airline struggling to meet expectations, both internally and externally. By the time the conversation tapered off and the flight attendants returned to their duties, Marcus's mind was racing. He had come on this trip hoping to identify areas for improvement, but he hadn't anticipated uncovering such widespread dissatisfaction. The implications were staggering. If morale among the staff was this low, it was only a matter of time before it affected customer experiences and ultimately the reputation of the entire airline. As the flight progressed, Marcus found himself unable to relax. He watched Sarah and Jake move through the cabin, their smiles forced and their energy drained. He observed the passengers around him, many of whom seemed oblivious to the challenges faced by the crew, and he thought about the decisions he and his leadership team had made over the years, decisions that may have contributed to this very situation. For the remainder of the flight, Marcus kept his gaze fixed on the seat back in front of him, lost in thought. He realized that this journey wasn't just about gathering information, it was about understanding the people who worked tirelessly to keep Skylink running, understanding the passengers who trusted the airline to take them where they needed to go, and most importantly, understanding the gaps that existed between what he thought he knew and what was really happening on the ground. As the plane descended toward Los Angeles, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was determined to address them head-on. But first, he needed to process everything he had seen and heard. This undercover mission had opened his eyes in ways he never expected, and it was only the beginning. As the plane continued its journey through the darkened skies, Marcus sat motionless in his seat, replaying Sarah and Jake's conversation over and over in his mind. The words they had spoken weren't just complaints, they were cries for help, signals of deeper issues that couldn't be ignored. Each sentence painted a vivid picture of frustration, exhaustion, and disillusionment. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly disconnected from the company he had built. He had always believed in leading with empathy, but now he wondered, if his efforts had been misguided or worse, insufficient. The flight attendants resumed their duties, navigating the narrow aisles with practiced efficiency. They distributed beverages to passengers, answered questions about in-flight entertainment, and politely reminded people to keep their seatbelts fastened. To the untrained eye, everything seemed normal. But Marcus saw beyond the surface. He noticed how Sarah hesitated before responding to a passenger's request, her smile lingering a fraction too long as if she were forcing herself to appear cheerful. He saw Jake pause frequently to stretch his back, clearly battling fatigue after what must have been a long day. These small details told a story far more compelling than any report Marcus had ever read. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. These employees weren't just tired, they felt abandoned. Somewhere along the line, Skylink had lost sight of its most valuable asset, its people. Marcus thought back to the countless meetings he'd attended where cost-cutting measures were discussed. At the time, they had seemed like logical decisions. Reducing staffing levels meant lower operational costs. Cutting back on supplies ensured budgets stayed intact. Streamlining processes promised greater efficiency. But none of those discussions had considered the human element, the toll these changes would take on the individuals responsible for delivering Skylink's promise of excellence. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. His mind raced with questions. How many other employees felt the way Sarah and Jake did? Had anyone else spoken up about these issues, only to be dismissed or ignored? And perhaps most importantly, why hadn't this feedback reached him sooner? As CEO, Marcus prided himself on being accessible, but now he realized that accessibility meant little if people didn't feel safe speaking candidly. There was a gap, a chasm, really, between leadership and frontline staff, and bridging it would require more than just good intentions. To distract himself, Marcus decided to engage with the passengers around him. Maybe hearing their perspectives would provide additional clarity. Turning to the man seated next to him, a middle-aged businessman typing furiously on his laptop, Marcus struck up a casual conversation. "Long flight, huh?" he said with a friendly smile. The man glanced up briefly, offering a polite nod. "Yeah, it's not bad, though. Could use better Wi-Fi, though." Marcus chuckled lightly, seizing the opportunity to dig deeper. "First time flying with us?" "No, I fly Skylink pretty often," the man replied. "It's usually okay, but lately it feels like things are slipping. Last month my flight was delayed because of maintenance issues. Then, when we finally took off, the air conditioning barely worked. Not exactly the experience you expect." From a major airline. Marcus nodded sympathetically, making a mental note of the comment. "That's frustrating. Have you noticed anything else that could use improvement?" The man shrugged. "Honestly, it's the little things, like the snacks are terrible and the flight attendants seem, I don't know, stressed? It's like they're doing their best, but something's holding them back." Marcus thanked the man for sharing his thoughts and turned his attention to the elderly woman sitting across the aisle. She was flipping through a magazine, her hands trembling slightly as she turned each page. Sensing an opportunity, Marcus leaned over and asked, "How's your flight going so far?" She looked up, surprised by the question, and smiled warmly. "Oh, it's fine, dear. Just ready to get home." Her voice softened as she added, "Though I do miss the old days when flights felt a bit more pleasant, you know. Now it's all about rushing and cutting corners. Even the blankets aren't as soft anymore." Her words echoed the sentiments Marcus had already heard, reinforcing the idea that Skylink's problems weren't isolated incidents. They were systemic, affecting everyone from seasoned business travelers to retirees seeking comfort during long journeys. The pattern was undeniable. Somewhere along the way, the airline had prioritized profit over people, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. By the time beverage service began, Marcus found himself observing every interaction between the crew and passengers. Some exchanges were cordial, even warm, but others carried an undertone of tension. One passenger grew visibly irritated when his drink order wasn't fulfilled immediately, snapping at Sarah as she juggled multiple requests. Instead of arguing back, Sarah simply apologized and moved on, her expression unreadable. Marcus winced inwardly, knowing full well that such moments took a toll on morale. What struck him most, however, was the resilience of the flight attendants. Despite the challenges they faced, they continued to perform their duties with professionalism and grace. They smiled when necessary, offered assistance without hesitation, and maintained composure even in difficult situations. It was clear that these individuals cared deeply about their jobs, but caring alone wasn't enough. Without proper support, resources, and recognition, their efforts would eventually burn out. As the hours ticked by, Marcus wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt proud of the dedication displayed by his team. On the other, he was overwhelmed by guilt. How had he allowed things to reach this point? Was he too focused on growth and expansion, neglecting the foundation upon which Skylink was built? The answers weren't easy, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: change was necessary and urgent. When the plane finally began its descent into Los Angeles, Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. This undercover mission had given him invaluable insights, but it was only the beginning. He needed to act not just as a CEO, but as a leader who genuinely cared about the well-being of his employees and customers. As the wheels touched down and the cabin erupted in applause, a rare occurrence these days, Marcus made a silent vow. Skylink would rise to meet these challenges head-on. For now, though, he remained anonymous, blending in with the crowd as passengers disembarked. He lingered near the exit, watching as Sarah and Jake completed their final checks before leaving the plane. Their faces showed relief mixed with exhaustion, a testament to the demanding nature of their work. Marcus wanted to approach them, to thank them for their honesty and assure them that their voices mattered, but he resisted the urge, knowing that revealing his identity prematurely could undermine the authenticity of his mission. Instead, he walked quietly through the terminal, his mind buzzing with ideas. Over the next few days, he would reflect on everything he had learned, piecing together a plan to address the issues plaguing Skylink. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but Marcus was determined to start somewhere. After all, the strength of an airline lay not in its profits or planes, but in the people who kept it soaring. And for Skylink to thrive, those people deserved nothing less than his unwavering commitment. The moment Marcus stepped off the plane in Los Angeles, he felt a weight pressing down on his shoulders, a mix of guilt, responsibility, and determination. The flight had been an eye-opening experience, one that left him with more questions than answers. But as he navigated the bustling terminal, weaving through streams of travelers dragging suitcases and checking their watches, Marcus knew he couldn't afford to dwell on emotions alone. Action was needed, and it had to start now. He spent the rest of the day replaying every detail of the journey in his mind: the worn seats, the flickering lights, the strained smiles of the flight attendants, and the candid conversations he'd overheard. Each memory reinforced the urgency of the situation. Skylink wasn't just facing operational challenges, it was grappling with a cultural crisis. Somewhere along the way, the airline had lost touch with its core values. Values Marcus himself had championed when he first took the helm. It was time to rediscover them. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Skylink's headquarters earlier than usual. His executive assistant greeted him with her typical cheerful demeanor, but Marcus bypassed pleasantries and headed straight for his office. He closed the door behind him, sat at his desk, and stared at the blank screen of his laptop. For several minutes, he simply thought, letting the enormity of the task ahead sink in. Then, with a deep breath, he began typing. By mid-morning, Marcus had drafted a detailed outline of the changes he wanted to implement. First and foremost, he planned to hold an emergency meeting with senior executives and department heads. This wouldn't be another routine gathering filled with PowerPoint slides and vague promises. It would be raw, honest, and unfiltered. Marcus intended to share everything he had witnessed during his undercover flight, from the specific complaints voiced by Sarah and Jake to the subtle frustrations expressed by passengers. He wanted his team to understand the gravity of the situation not as abstract data points but as real-life experiences affecting real people. When the meeting commenced later that afternoon, Marcus walked into the conference room with purpose. The executives exchanged curious glances as he took his seat at the head of the table. Gone was the casual attire from his flight. Today, he wore his signature tailored suit, a symbol of authority and resolve. After a brief pause to gather his thoughts, Marcus began speaking. "I need everyone's full attention," he said, his voice firm yet calm. "What I'm about to share isn't easy to hear, but it's critical if we want Skylink to thrive, not just survive." One by one, Marcus recounted the observations and conversations from his undercover trip. He described the worn-out upholstery, the malfunctioning equipment, and the palpable exhaustion of the flight attendants. He shared anecdotes from passengers who felt neglected or underserved. And then, with careful emphasis, he relayed snippets of Sarah and Jake's conversation, their frustration over staffing cuts, supply shortages, and the growing disconnect between management and frontline staff. The room fell silent. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others scribbled notes furiously. A few looked genuinely shocked, as though they hadn't realized how dire the situation had become. Marcus watched their reactions closely, gauging their responses. When he finished speaking, he leaned forward and locked eyes with each person around the table. "This isn't just a PR issue," he continued. "It's a cultural one. We've become so focused on numbers and efficiencies that we've forgotten the human element, the heart of what makes Skylink special. Our employees are our backbone, and our customers are our lifeline. If we don't fix this, we risk losing both." The discussion that followed was intense and productive. Executives debated potential solutions, raising concerns about budget, constraints, and logistical challenges. Marcus listened attentively, nodding where appropriate but pushing back when excuses threatened to derail progress. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined a multi-pronged strategy to address the issues: increased staffing levels. Additional flight attendants and ground crew members would be hired to alleviate workload pressures. Scheduling adjustments would also be made to ensure employees weren't stretched too thin. Enhanced training programs. New training initiatives would focus not only on technical skills, but also on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Employees would learn how to handle difficult situations with confidence and empathy. Investment in cabin upgrades. Aging interiors, faulty equipment, and outdated amenities would be replaced or refurbished. Regular inspections would become mandatory to maintain high standards of comfort and safety. Improved communication channels. An anonymous feedback system would be introduced, allowing employees to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Monthly town hall meetings would provide a platform for open dialogue between leadership and staff. Leadership accountability. Marcus committed to leading by example. He vowed to continue making unannounced flights periodically, ensuring that the changes implemented were having the desired impact. Transparency and accessibility would become non-negotiable priorities. As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was confident that with collective effort, Skylink could turn things around. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into overseeing the rollout of these initiatives. Progress was slow but steady, and Marcus made it a point to stay visible throughout the process. He visited maintenance facilities, attended training sessions, and even joined flight attendants during pre-flight briefings to better understand their daily routines. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a visit to a regional hub. Marcus approached a group of flight attendants who were preparing for an upcoming flight. Recognizing him immediately, they froze, unsure how to react. Smiling warmly, Marcus extended his hand. "Thank you for all that you do," he said sincerely. "I know it's not always easy, but your hard work doesn't go unnoticed. Please keep sharing your thoughts. We're listening." The gesture broke the ice, prompting a lively exchange of ideas and concerns. Marcus left the facility feeling inspired, knowing that rebuilding trust would take time but was absolutely worth the effort. Back at headquarters, Marcus kept a close watch on metrics like employee satisfaction scores, customer feedback, and operational performance. Slowly but surely, the numbers began to improve. Passengers reported cleaner cabins, friendlier service, and fewer delays. Employees expressed gratitude for the additional support and resources. Even Sarah and Jake, whom Marcus encountered during a subsequent undercover flight, remarked on the positive changes they'd noticed since his initial trip. Through it all, Marcus remained humble. He understood that leadership wasn't about claiming credit. It was about empowering others to succeed. Every decision he made, every initiative he launched, was rooted in the belief that a company's true strength lies in its people. And as Skylink began to transform, not just operationally but culturally, Marcus knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, leading with heart, accountability, and unwavering dedication. Months had passed since Marcus Thompson's undercover flight, and the changes he initiated were beginning to take root. Skylink Airlines was undergoing a transformation, not just in its operations but in its very soul. The once distant relationship between leadership and frontline staff was slowly being replaced by open communication, mutual respect, and a shared sense of purpose. Passengers noticed the difference too, as their flights became smoother, more comfortable, and genuinely enjoyable. Yet for Marcus, this wasn't the end of the journey. It was the start of something bigger. One crisp morning, Marcus stood at the podium in the company's largest conference hall, addressing hundreds of employees gathered for the quarterly town hall meeting. These meetings had become a cornerstone of Skylink's new culture, offering a platform for honest dialogue and collaboration. Gone were the days of scripted speeches and carefully curated presentations. Today, Marcus spoke from the heart. "Let me begin by thanking each and every one of you," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Over the past few months, we've faced challenges together, and I'm proud to say that we've risen to meet them. But this isn't about patting ourselves on the back. It's about recognizing how far we've come and acknowledging the work still ahead." He paused, scanning the room filled with faces ranging from pilots and flight attendants to ground crew members and administrative staff. Some nodded in agreement while others listened intently, pens poised over notebooks. Marcus knew they were the true heroes of Skylink's story, the ones who kept the airline running day after day, often without recognition. Today, he wanted to celebrate their efforts. "We started this journey because we realized something important. Success isn't measured by profits alone. It's measured by the experiences we create. For our passengers, yes, but also for each other. When you feel valued and supported, it shows in everything you do. And when our customers see that passion, they trust us to take care of them." The crowd erupted into applause, a testament to the progress made so far. But Marcus didn't let the moment linger too long. He shifted gears, diving into specific updates about ongoing initiatives. New hires had joined the team, easing workload pressures for existing employees. Training programs had been revamped, focusing not only on technical skills but also on fostering empathy and teamwork. Cabin upgrades were underway, with newer planes featuring state-of-the-art amenities and refurbished interiors. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus highlighted the impact of the anonymous feedback system. Since its introduction, thousands of employees had submitted suggestions, concerns, and ideas directly to management. Many of these contributions had already led to tangible improvements, such as better meal options for passengers, redesigned uniforms for comfort, and revised scheduling policies to reduce burnout. Marcus emphasized that no suggestion was too small. Every voice mattered. To illustrate his point, Marcus shared a story about a recent incident involving a delayed flight due to unexpected weather conditions. Instead of panicking or growing frustrated, the flight attendants worked seamlessly with the ground crew to keep passengers informed and comfortable. They distributed snacks, offered reassurance, and even organized impromptu games for children on board. When the plane finally landed, passengers applauded, not just because they'd reached their destination, but because they felt cared for throughout the ordeal. "That's what Skylink is all about," Marcus said, his eyes shining with pride. "It's about going above and beyond even when things don't go according to plan. It's about treating each other and our customers with kindness, patience, and respect. That spirit is what sets us apart. As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus invited questions from the audience. Hands shot up across the room, eager to engage. One employee asked about plans to expand the training program to include mental health support, while another inquired about timelines for upgrading older aircraft. Marcus answered each question thoughtfully, demonstrating his commitment to transparency and accountability. Afterward, as employees filed out of the conference hall, many approached Marcus personally to thank him. Some shared stories of how the recent changes had improved their work-life balance, while others expressed excitement about future opportunities. A young flight attendant named Mia told Marcus how much she appreciated the emphasis on emotional intelligence during training sessions. "It's made me feel more confident in handling tough situations," she said with a smile. "And my passengers have noticed the difference too." Marcus left the event feeling energized but grounded. He knew there was still work to be done, but the momentum was undeniable. Skylink was becoming the airline he had always envisioned, one that prioritized people over profits, service over shortcuts, and connection over convenience. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued making unannounced flights, determined to stay connected to the realities of daily operations. On one such trip, he found himself seated next to Sarah, the seasoned flight attendant whose conversation he had overheard months earlier. At first, she didn't recognize him, chatting amiably about her shift and sharing anecdotes about funny passenger interactions. But when Marcus revealed his identity, Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to gratitude. "I heard about the changes you've made," she said softly. "They've really helped. We're not perfect yet, but it feels like someone finally cares." Her words struck a chord deep within Marcus. It wasn't perfection he was striving for. It was progress. Every step forward, no matter how small, brought Skylink closer to fulfilling its mission of excellence. By the end of the year, Skylink's reputation had begun to soar. Customer satisfaction scores reached record highs, and employee retention rates improved significantly. Industry publications praised the airline for its innovative approach to workplace culture, while social media buzzed with positive reviews from delighted passengers. Yet Marcus remained humble, knowing that the real victory lay in the relationships rebuilt and the trust restored. As he sat in his office late one evening, reflecting on the journey so far, Marcus couldn't help but smile. What started as a simple decision to book a coach ticket had evolved into a profound lesson in leadership. He had learned that true success wasn't about titles, accolades, or financial gains. It was about listening, learning, and leading with authenticity. And so Marcus vowed to never stop listening. Whether through undercover flights, town hall meetings, or casual conversations with employees, he would continue seeking out the truths that mattered most. Because at the end of the day, Skylink wasn't just an airline, it was a community. And communities thrive when everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. With renewed determination, Marcus turned off his desk lamp and headed home, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. After all, the sky was no longer the limit, it was just the beginning.